On the morning of March 1st, 2026, 17 oil tankers stopped moving at the same time. Not because of a storm, not because of engine failure, because a single voice on a restricted IRGC naval frequency issued 3 words that no tanker captain in 19 years of sailing this route had ever heard directed at him personally. The strait is closed. 20% of the world's daily oil supply is frozen. Not by a war, not by a treaty, by one man who had spent 8 years building the doctrine, the authority, and the operational architecture to make that moment possible with a single transmission. His name was Alireza Tangsiri, Rear Admiral, IRGC Navy, the man who commanded every patrol boat, every choke point, every contingency in the Persian Gulf. And the reason oil prices would climb from $72 to $119 a barrel in less than 3 weeks. And somewhere in a secure communications room that night, a Mossad case officer was looking at a file that had been building for 7 years. The file didn't just say who Tangsiri was. It said what he would do before he did it. What it didn't say was how to reach him. The case officer's operational designation inside the file was a Handler 7. That is the only name that matters here, because it is the only name that will ever be attached to what followed. He had been running maritime intelligence operations in the Middle East for 11 years. He had worked the Persian Gulf during the tanker seizure campaigns of 2019. He had been on the desk the night the IRGC boarded the British-flagged Stena Impero and held its crew for 2 months. He understood the Gulf not as a geography, but as a set of pressure points, places where small decisions produced enormous consequences. When the Tangsiri file was transferred to his desk in early 2025, he read it in one sitting, then he read it again. Then he wrote a single line in the operational margin of the psychological assessment. It read, "He knows we're watching." The question is whether he thinks that's enough. To understand the problem Handler 7 was inheriting, you have to understand what made Tangsiri different from every other senior IRGC commander Israel had removed or was preparing to remove. By February 2026, Israel had already dismantled a significant portion of Iran's military and political leadership. Hossein Salami was dead. His replacement lasted 72 hours. Iran's intelligence minister had been eliminated in a strike on a safe house in northern Tehran. The machinery of targeted killing that Mossad had been constructing for 2 decades was, by any intelligence metric, functioning. And yet, the Strait of Hormuz was still closed, because Tangsiri had designed the naval command to survive exactly this scenario. He had spent 8 years ensuring that blockade operations did not require authorization from Tehran. They did not require a functioning chain of command above him. If Iran's political and military leadership fell, the order he had issued would simply continue, executed by the officers below him who had been trained in his doctrine and were stationed at their posts. He hadn't just built a blockade. He had built a blockade that didn't need him to stay alive to keep running. That was the strategic problem. And that is why the file landed on Handler 7's desk with a priority classification that had only been used twice before in IRGC naval operations. Yet the file itself was a 7-year accumulation. It had begun in 2017, when Tangsiri was a lower-ranking flag officer, not yet a high-value target, not yet on any strike list. A signals intelligence analyst monitoring IRGC naval communications had flagged something in his internal writings that didn't match the profile of a standard naval commander. Tangsiri wasn't writing about tactics, he was writing about leverage. His internal papers, circulated within IRGC command, described the Strait of Hormuz not as a defensive position but as an offensive economic weapon. He argued that Iran didn't need to win a conventional war. It only needed to create 48 hours of genuine uncertainty about oil supply. The global financial market would do the rest, inflicting an economic cost on Western governments that no military engagement could match. The analyst's assessment was a single paragraph in a routine intelligence summary. It said, "This officer is building a maritime economic warfare doctrine." If he is appointed to a command position, he represents a strategic risk that exists independently of any broader conflict. The assessment was filed. Tangsiri was placed on a watch list. 1 year later, Khamenei appointed him commander of the IRGC Navy. The watch list became a target file, but here's the first problem Handler 7 had to solve before anything else. Tangsiri knew he was being watched, not in the vague, institutional way that all senior IRGC commanders understood they were potential targets. He had specific intelligence from IRGC counterintelligence briefings that Mossad had penetrated portions of the naval communications infrastructure. He had changed his communication protocols 3 times in 18 months. He had relocated his operational command center twice. He had stopped using the same vehicles for more than 2 consecutive trips. He had studied what happened to Qasem Soleimani, killed at Baghdad airport in January 2020, his location confirmed through a combination of phone intercepts, human intelligence, and a pattern of movement he had repeated one too many times. Tangsiri had taken that case apart. He had, by all accounts, built his personal security doctrine around one single lesson from it: never be predictable in open ground. This meant that the standard targeting methods, overhead surveillance, pattern of life analysis, signal tracking, all had a ceiling. They could tell you where Tangsiri had been. They could not reliably tell you where he would be. To reach him, you needed something inside. Handler 7's team began the access assessment in February 2025. What they found was a picture that was almost entirely closed. Mossad had run human assets in Bandar Abbas before, the port city at the narrowest point of the strait, the operational headquarters of IRGC Naval Command in the Gulf. 3 known historical contacts going back to the late 1990s. 2 were dead. The third had not been activated in 6 years and was flagged by counterintelligence review as potentially known to IRGC security services. Fresh access in Bandar base in early 2026, with Iran on a war footing, IRGC security elevated to maximum alert, and the naval complex operating under the kind of internal security scrutiny that comes with running a globally consequential blockade, was assessed at less than 25% probability of success within any viable operational window. Handler 7 read the assessment. He initialed it. Then he wrote beneath the probability estimate, in the same sparse operational margin he always used, find the edge of the network, not the center. It was not a strategy. It was a direction. What it meant, in practice, was that they would not try to place an asset inside the naval command. They would map the supply chain that fed it, the logistics contractors, the communications vendors, the procurement networks that kept a facility like Bandar Abbas operational, and find a node that connected to someone who might, without realizing the full implication of the question, be able to answer one thing. Where does the commander go when he goes to the port? That search led them, eventually, to a mid-level logistics contractor, Iranian-born, not affiliated with any known intelligence network, operating out of the UAE under a commercial registration that had no visible connection to anything sensitive. He had been cultivated for 3 years by a Mossad officer working under commercial cover in Dubai. He had never provided military intelligence. What he provided was mundane: shipping schedules, port access records, container manifest data for vessels moving through IRGC-controlled checkpoints, the kind of information that, individually, means almost nothing. Collectively, it had given Mossad a working map of the logistics architecture feeding the IRGC naval complex at Bandar Abbas. He didn't know he was building a map. He thought he was selling scheduling data to a commercial maritime consultancy. In early March 2026, he was given a new question, not a document request, not a surveillance task. One question delivered through the same communication channel he had used for 3 years, framed in the same commercial language he had always received. We need to confirm delivery routing for a specific communications installation at the main port complex. Can you verify which facility the commander uses for operational briefings and whether his schedule aligns with the delivery window? He said he would find out. He came back 12 days later with an answer. The answer was wrong. And for the next 8 days, Handler 7's team built a strike package around a building Tangsiri was no longer using. If a man spends 7 years making himself impossible to find, and you finally locate him, how do you know the location isn't the trap? The secondary facility was real. That was the problem. It wasn't fabricated intelligence. It wasn't a plant. It wasn't a deliberate deception operation run by IRGC counterintelligence to burn the asset and misdirect the strike. The building existed. The communications equipment had genuinely been delivered there. IRGC personnel were operating out of it. When Handler 7's team ran overhead imagery against it for the first 3 days, they saw vehicle movement, entry and exit patterns, and the kind of low-level operational activity that was entirely consistent with an active secondary command node. It looked right because it was right. It just wasn't where Tangsiri was, and for 8 days the entire strike architecture was built around it. Handler 7 had a team of 7 analysts running pattern-of-life assessment against the secondary facility. They were cross-referencing satellite imagery with signals intelligence fragments, building a probabilistic schedule of when the facility saw its highest command-level activity. They identified a vehicle arrival pattern. 3 specific vehicles, arriving within a 90-minute window on 6 of the 8 days they observed, that the team assessed as consistent with the senior commander's movement cycle. They were not wrong about the vehicles. The vehicles were real. The senior commander using them was real. It was not Tangsiri. No one on the team knew that yet. On day 6 of the pattern of life analysis, a junior analyst flagged something in the imagery review that she almost didn't include in her daily summary report. The vehicles she was tracking were consistent in one detail that she found slightly unusual. When they departed the secondary facility, they consistently moved north, away from the port complex, deeper into the city. Not toward the water, not toward any IRGC naval installation she could identify on the base map. She noted it. She wrote 3 lines about it in her report. She assessed it as possibly indicating a residential or administrative destination outside the operational area. She did not escalate it. Handler 7 read the daily summary. He read her 3 lines. He moved on. That 3-line observation would become, 48 hours later, the detail that unraveled 8 days of work. The intercept came from Unit 8200 on day 8. It was a fragment, a partial IRGC naval communication that had been captured during a routine signal sweep of the Bandar Abbas operational frequencies. The fragment was damaged. Portions were unrecoverable. What remained was a location reference, a facility designation used in IRGC internal communications, attached to a timestamp and what appeared to be a command-level authorization code. The facility designation did not match the secondary installation. It matched the main port complex. Handler 7 read the intercept at 2:14 in the morning. He read it twice. Then he pulled the full signals file, every intercept associated with that facility designation going back 30 days, and spent 4 hours going through it line by line. What he found was a pattern that had been there the entire time, and that no one had thought to look for because they had already decided where Tangsiri was. The main port complex had been receiving a specific class of encrypted command traffic, the kind associated with senior operational briefings, at irregular but recurring intervals over the previous 3 weeks. The traffic didn't announce itself, it didn't carry Tangsiri's name, it was embedded in the routine communications noise of a functioning naval facility. But it was there. Handler 7 closed the file at 6:30. He sat for approximately 4 minutes without moving. Then he sent a single-line communication to his operations director. It read, "We have been building against the wrong target, requesting authorization for full reassessment." The response came back in 11 minutes. It read, "You have 72 hours. After that, authorization lapses and this goes to a different desk, 72 hours. That was the operational window remaining before the intelligence architecture that had taken months to construct. The asset network, the signals positioning, the strike coordination framework, expired or was reassigned. After 72 hours, the decision about Tangsiri would move up the chain to a level where Handler 7 would have no operational control over how it was executed. He understood what that meant. A decision made at a higher level, under greater political pressure, with less operational granularity, was a decision more likely to be made on incomplete intelligence and more likely to produce a strike that was imprecise, that missed, that alerted Tangsiri and drove him underground permanently. The 72-hour window was not just a deadline. It was the difference between a targeted operation and a desperate one. The reassessment began immediately. The first question Handler 7 put to the team was the one that should have been asked on day 1, and wasn't, "Why did we anchor to the secondary facility so quickly?" The answer, when it came out in the operational review, was uncomfortable. They had anchored to it because the asset's information was the only ground-level intelligence they had. Everything else, the overhead imagery, the signals fragments, the vehicle patterns had been used to confirm what the asset said, not to independently verify it. The confirmation bias had been total. They had built 8 days of analysis on a foundation they had never questioned, because questioning it would have meant accepting that they had no reliable location at all. Handler 7 said very little during this review. He let his team work through it. But one of the analysts present later recalled that at a certain point he stopped the discussion, looked at the room, and said something that didn't appear in any formal record of the meeting. He said, "We confirmed what we wanted to find. That is not intelligence work. That is wishful targeting. We will not do that again." Then he told them to start over. The reassessment had 3 parallel tracks. The first was a full reanalysis of the signal's intercept archive, every fragment associated with the main port complex over the previous 30 days, reviewed without the assumption that the secondary facility was the primary command location. The second was a review of the logistics asset's original reporting. Not to discredit it, the asset had answered the question he was asked honestly and accurately. The problem was the question itself. He had been asked to confirm delivery routing to a specific communications installation. He had done that. No one had asked him whether the installation in question was the one Tangsiri was actually using. The question had contained the assumption. The asset had simply answered it. The third track was the detail the junior analyst had flagged on day 6, the vehicles moving north after departing the secondary facility, away from the water. Handler 7 pulled the imagery for each of those northward vehicle movements and traced them as far as the overhead coverage allowed. 3 of the 6 tracking instances led to a dead end in the city. The imagery resolution degraded before he could confirm a destination. The other 3 showed the vehicles passing through a checkpoint on the northern perimeter of the main port complex. They hadn't been leaving. They had been arriving at a different entrance. By hour 31 of the 72-hour window, the picture had reorganized itself around the main port complex with a confidence level that was still imperfect, but was significantly stronger than anything that had supported the strike package against the secondary facility. The signal's traffic was there. The vehicle routing now tracked there. And the psychological profile, the one element that had been in the file for 7 years and had not changed, said the same thing it had always said. He is most comfortable near the water. He is most predictable near his operational assets. The main port complex sat directly on the waterfront at Bandar Abbas. It was not a hidden location. It was not a safe house or a secondary installation chosen for obscurity. It was the operational heart of IRGC Naval Command in the Persian Gulf, the most visible, most heavily guarded facility on the Iranian Gulf Coast. And Tangsiri had moved into it, not because he felt safe, because he felt essential, because the blockade was his, and he wanted to be standing inside it while it ran. Handler 7 briefed the new strike package at hour 47. The briefing lasted 38 minutes. At the end of it, his operations director asked one question. He said, "What is the confidence level that he is in the main complex right now?" Handler 7 gave him a number. The number was 61%. There was a silence in the room after that. 61% was not a certainty. In most operational contexts, 61% was not sufficient authorization for a kinetic strike on a facility of this size. In a city of this density, with the geopolitical consequences that a miss or a misidentification would carry. Handler 7 knew what the silence meant. He said, "It is also 100% that if we wait for higher confidence, he moves again. And we start over with no window and no asset." The operations director looked at the table for a long moment. He did not say yes. He did not say no. He said, "I need 2 more hours." And in those 2 hours, before anyone in that room knew whether the operation would proceed or be handed to a desk that would approach it differently or not at all, Handler 7 sat alone with the file and thought about a man in the UAE who had answered a question he didn't fully understand, who was, at that moment, still waiting to be told what came next. The main port complex at Bandar Abbas housed, on any given day, several hundred IRGC naval personnel. If the intelligence was wrong, if the 61% was the wrong 61, the strike would kill people who were not Tangsiri, alert the one man they needed to reach, and hand Iran a propaganda event that would outlast the operation by years. The authorization had not come, the window had 43 hours left, and the asset in the UAE had just sent a message asking whether the delivery question was still relevant. The authorization came at hour 49. Not the clean formal authorization that the operational framework required, not a documented sign-off with a timestamp and a classification header. It came as a verbal instruction passed through a secure channel, recorded in the operational log as a single phrase, "Proceed within parameters. Final call is yours." Handler 7 read it twice. Then he began the strike sequencing. What he did not know, what no one in the room knew at that moment, was that the 61% confidence figure he had given his operations director had already degraded. Because while the authorization process had consumed 49 hours, the target had not stayed still. The first indication came at 17:20 local time on March 25th. A scheduled reconnaissance pass over the main port complex returned imagery that showed something the team had not seen in any of the previous 8 days of observation against the facility. The vehicle presence was different. Not absent, there were vehicles, but the specific clustering pattern that had developed as a consistent indicator of senior command activity was disrupted. 3 of the vehicles that had anchored the pattern were parked in different positions. One was missing entirely. The targeting analyst ran the comparison against the previous 8 days of imagery in 11 minutes and came back with an assessment that she delivered without qualification. She said, "This does not match the established pattern. Either the pattern was never reliable or something changed in the last 18 hours. Handler 7 asked her which she thought it was. She said she didn't know. That was the honest answer. It was also the worst possible answer to receive 22 minutes before a strike window opened. There were 3 interpretations of what the imagery showed. The first was that the pattern had always been unreliable, that the vehicle clustering they had used as a command presence indicator was coincidental, and that the main complex had never been Tangsiri's operating location. This interpretation meant the entire reassessment had produced a second wrong target. The second was that the pattern was reliable, but had been disrupted by routine operational variation, personnel movements, vehicle maintenance, a shift in scheduling, and that Tangsiri was still inside the complex, but the visible indicators had temporarily shifted. The third was that Tangsiri was in the process of leaving. If the third interpretation was correct, the strike window was not 22 minutes away. It was already closing. Handler 7 had 7 minutes to make a recommendation before the window expired. He did not deliberate for 7 minutes. He deliberated for 4. Then he looked at the imagery one more time. Not at the vehicles, at the facility itself. At the berths along the waterfront section of the complex, where 3 IRGC fast attack craft were visible in the overhead frame. They were still there, fully crewed as far as the imagery could indicate. Active. If Tangsiri were departing, if the convoy was a departure movement, you would expect the waterfront assets to be in transition. You would expect some indication of redistribution. You would expect the facility to be entering a lower operational tempo, not sustaining it. The waterfront assets were not in transition. They were at full readiness posture. Handler 7 looked at that detail for approximately 30 seconds. Then he said, "He's not leaving. He is preparing to brief. The vehicle positioning is pre-briefing consolidation, not departure. We are inside the window, we proceed." His targeting analyst said nothing. She pulled the strike parameters onto her screen and began the final sequencing. She did not tell him in that moment that she was not certain he was right. She told him afterward. She said she had been 60% confident in his interpretation and 40% convinced they were about to strike an emptying building. She proceeded anyway, because in that room, in that moment, 60% was the best certainty anyone had. The strike was authorized at 23:12 local time. The munitions reached the main port complex at Bandar Abbas at 23:41, and for approximately 4 minutes after impact, Handler 7's team had no battle damage assessment, no signals confirmation, and no indication of what the strike had actually hit. The communications architecture that would normally begin producing intercept traffic immediately after a strike, the emergency frequencies, the unit check-ins, the command network reactivating under a crisis protocol, was silent. Complete silence on every frequency they were monitoring. That silence was not what they expected. A successful strike on a functioning command node produces noise. Panic generates radio traffic. Units check in. Secondary frequencies activate. The electronic signature of a disrupted but surviving command structure is immediately and distinctly readable. What complete silence meant was one of 2 things. Either the strike had been so precise and so total that the entire command communications infrastructure in that section of the facility had been destroyed simultaneously, which was possible given the secondary explosions the damage assessment would later confirm. Or the silence was deliberate. A security protocol. A pre-planned communications blackout designed to deny exactly the kind of battle damage confirmation that Handler 7's team was trying to read, which would mean the IRGC had anticipated an intercept operation running parallel to the strike, which would mean Tangsiri might have been moved before the munitions arrived. Handler 7 said nothing for 3 minutes and 40 seconds. His team did not fill the silence. They had worked with him long enough to understand that this particular silence was not uncertainty, it was processing. He was running the scenario tree in real time, assessing each branch, calculating which response made sense before he committed to any of them. At the 3-minute 40 mark, he said, "Pull everything on the secondary facility, right now. I want to know if there is any signal activity at the secondary location in the last 2 hours." The analyst ran it in 90 seconds. There was nothing. The secondary facility was as quiet as the main complex. That ruled out one branch of the scenario tree. If this were a deliberate misdirection, if Tangsiri had been moved to the secondary facility in a counter-targeting maneuver, there would be activity there now. There was nothing anywhere. That left 2 remaining possibilities. Either the main complex communications blackout was a post-strike security protocol, or every IRGC naval communications node in Bandar Abbas had gone dark simultaneously for a reason that had nothing to do with their operation. Handler 7 said, quietly, and without looking up from the signals display, "We wait." The first external confirmation came 41 minutes after impact. It was not from an intelligence channel. It was not from a signals intercept. It was a single post on an Iranian Telegram channel, a pro-IRGC account with a history of early unofficial reporting on military events, that said only that there had been a significant Israeli strike on a naval facility in Bandar Abbas, and that casualties included senior command personnel. Senior command personnel. Not Tangsiri's name, not a confirmation. A phrase that could mean anything from a base commander to a junior officer who happened to hold a command grade rank. Handler 7 read it and said nothing. 30 minutes after that, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz made a public statement. He said, "The man directly responsible for the mining and blocking of the Strait of Hormuz has been eliminated." The room did not react the way rooms react in films. There was no exhale, no release of tension, no visible change in posture. 2 analysts exchanged a look. One of them quietly updated the operational log with a timestamp. Handler 7 read the statement twice, then set it down. Then he asked for the current status of the Strait of Hormuz transit monitoring. The answer came back within 2 minutes. The strait was still closed. IRGC patrol vessels were still in position. The blockade protocols were still active. The fast attack craft at Bandar Abbas, the same ones whose full readiness posture had informed his decision to proceed 23 minutes before the strike, were still at their berths. Nothing had changed in the water. A man was dead. The thing he had built was still running. It was not until 4 days later, March 30th, 2026, that Iran's IRGC formally confirmed the death. 4 days of official silence. 4 days during which the IRGC Naval Command, leaderless at the top, continued to execute the blockade through the distributed command structure that Tangsiri had spent 8 years constructing for exactly this scenario. When the confirmation finally came, it was issued in the language of martyrdom. It spoke of sacrifice and the continuation of the mission. It named a successor. It made no reference to any disruption in operational capability. The statement was accurate. There had been no disruption in operational capability. That night, Handler 7 filed his post-operation assessment. It ran to 11 pages. The final paragraph, the operational conclusion, was 4 sentences. It said, "The target was eliminated. The operation achieved its primary objective within its stated parameters. The strategic conditions that generated the requirement for this operation remain unchanged. Assessment of secondary effects is ongoing." He filed it. He closed the terminal. He sat for a moment in the empty room, and then he thought about the asset in the UAE who had sent a message 4 days ago that no one had answered yet. The message was still sitting in the queue, marked unread. It said, "Is everything resolved? I have not heard anything. Should I continue as normal?" Handler 7 looked at it for a long time. He did not reply. The blockade was 30 days old when Tangsiri died. The IRGC Naval Command had been running it for 30 days, without a single vessel transiting through the strait under standard commercial authorization. 17 million barrels of oil per day held in place. Oil prices at $119 and still climbing. The global shipping insurance market had effectively suspended coverage for any vessel within 200 nautical miles of the strait. 3 major Asian economies had already begun emergency drawdowns from strategic reserves. The economic pressure was not theoretical. It was landing in real time, in fuel prices and logistics costs and manufacturing slowdowns across a dozen countries that had no involvement in the conflict itself. The assumption, inside the intelligence architecture that had authorized the strike, inside the political structure that had accelerated the 72-hour window, inside the public statement issued by Israel's defense minister, was that removing Tangsiri would create a rupture, that the blockade would either collapse or become negotiable. That assumption was wrong, and it was wrong in a way that had been predictable from the beginning, if anyone had read the file carefully enough. The file had said it in 2017. The analyst who first flagged Tangsiri had written that his doctrine represented a strategic risk that existed independently of any broader conflict. Independently. The word was precise. It meant the doctrine did not require him to survive. It meant he had designed it to outlast him. For 8 years, Tangsiri had distributed the operational authority of the blockade across the IRGC naval command structure in a way that ensured no single point of failure, including himself, could shut it down. The unit commanders below him had standing orders. They had authorization protocols that did not require upward confirmation. They had been trained, repeatedly and deliberately, to continue operations in the absence of command-level communication. Tangsiri had, in effect, built his own replacement into the system before he died. The IRGC officer appointed as his successor, named within 48 hours of the formal death confirmation, issued his first public statement from the same operational position Tangsiri had held, in the same port complex, using the same language of the blockade's continuation. He said, "The mission does not change. The enemies have killed the commander. They have not killed the command." He was correct. The immediate geopolitical consequence was not what the strike's architects had modeled. They had modeled a scenario in which Tangsiri's removal created a leadership vacuum that produced, within days, a fracture in the IRGC Naval Command, a divergence between hardliners committed to the blockade and pragmatists willing to negotiate. They had assessed, at moderate confidence, that the psychological impact of losing a commander of Tangsiri's stature would generate internal pressure within the IRGC to demonstrate flexibility, to show the international community that the blockade was a political instrument, not a permanent condition. What it generated instead was the opposite. The internal pressure inside IRGC Naval Command after Tangsiri's death ran entirely in one direction, toward proving that the command was undamaged, that the mission was unaffected, and that Israel had not achieved anything operationally meaningful by striking the man who ran the strait. The institutional imperative to demonstrate continuity was stronger than any individual officer's inclination toward pragmatism. Any commander who had been privately willing to explore a negotiated reopening of the strait before March 25th was, after March 25th, unable to advance that position without appearing to reward the strike that killed his predecessor. The killing had made the blockade politically harder to end, not easier. The oil market understood this before the intelligence community fully articulated it. On March the 26th, the day of Israel's public confirmation, prices dropped briefly, not significantly, barely $3 a barrel. A reflex movement by traders who had modeled the same assumption the strike's architects had modeled, that Tangsiri's death meant the blockade was entering its final phase. By March the 28th, prices had recovered everything they lost and added $6 more. The market had corrected itself faster than the political narrative did. Traders who tracked the actual movement of vessels at the strait, not the press statements, not the intelligence assessments, but the ships themselves, saw that nothing had changed at the waterline. The blockade was intact. The economic weapon Tangsiri had spent 8 years constructing was still operational, running itself, indifferent to the death of the man who built it. One analysis, published in a financial intelligence brief on March 29th, put it in terms that no official communication ever would. It said, "The strike removed a person. It did not remove a system. Markets, price systems, not persons. Then there is the cost that does not appear in any official account. The logistics contractor in the UAE, the man who had answered a question he did not fully understand, who had spent 3 years providing shipping schedule data to what he believed was a commercial maritime consultancy, who had been asked in early March to verify a delivery routing detail that was never about deliveries, was arrested by Emirati authorities on April 5, 2026. The circumstances of his arrest have not been formally confirmed. What is known through sources adjacent to the case is that Iranian intelligence had traced the information leak through the IRGC logistics network he had accessed. The chain of inference was not clean, it took weeks to reconstruct, but it was sufficient. A request was made through channels that exist between intelligence services in the Gulf region, channels that do not appear in any treaty or bilateral agreement, but that function with quiet reliability. The request was honored. He was held for 11 days. He did not survive custody. He was 43 years old. He had a sister in Shiraz whom he had not seen in 4 years. He had been sending money to his mother through a hawala network every month since 2019. He did not know, when he agreed to answer the delivery route in question, that he was providing targeting intelligence for a military strike. He had not been told. The framing had been commercial throughout. The plausible deniability was from Mossad's operational perspective, a feature of the asset structure, not a failure of it. From his perspective, it was simply the last thing he was never told. Handler 7 learned of his arrest on April 7th. He learned of his death on April 9th. He filed no supplementary report. He submitted no request for review. There is no documented response to the information in the operational archive. What exists is a single entry in the personal operational log that Handler 7 maintained separately from the official record, a log that was not submitted for classification review and whose existence was confirmed only later. The entry, dated April 9th, is 4 words. It reads, "He knew the cost." The ambiguity of that sentence, whether Handler 7 was referring to the asset, or to himself, or to the nature of the work itself, is not resolved anywhere in the record. It was not intended to be. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Every day, under normal conditions, between 15 and 17 million barrels of oil pass through it. For decades, the geography of that number has been both Iran's most valuable strategic asset and the single most consequential choke point in the global energy architecture. Every conflict, every sanction regime, every military posture in the Persian Gulf has been shaped, in some degree, by the question of what happens if that passage closes. Tangsiri spent 8 years answering that question. Not theoretically, operationally. He built the doctrine, the command structure, the distributed authorization protocols, and the institutional culture that made the closure of the strait a viable, executable, and, as it turned out, durable strategic action. He is dead. The answer he built is not. Whatever commander succeeds him will inherit a naval force that has now proven, for the first time in history, that the strait can be closed under real wartime conditions and held closed for more than 30 days without internal collapse. That proof does not disappear with the man who designed the demonstration. It becomes the baseline for every future IRGC naval commander, every future strategic planner, every future Iranian government calculating its leverage against external pressure. Tangsiri's greatest operational achievement was not the blockade itself. It was making the blockade repeatable. And then there is the question of what this operation did to the broader targeting architecture that produced it. The strike on Tangsiri was the 15th confirmed targeted killing of a senior Iranian military or political figure since the conflict began. Each successive operation had required deeper penetration of a more hardened security environment. Each had consumed more intelligence resources, more time, more human exposure. The asset network that had taken years to build was being drawn down at a rate that no program of recruitment could replace in the short term. The contractor in the UAE was not the only asset lost in the aftermath of the March 25th strike, and 2 other peripheral contacts in the logistics network were identified and removed from circulation by Iranian counterintelligence within 3 weeks of the operation. The communications channel that had been used for 3 years without detection was burned. The commercial cover identity under which the Mossad officer in Dubai had operated was compromised and required immediate withdrawal. The operation succeeded. The architecture that enabled it did not survive the operation intact. What Mossad had built over 20 years in the Persian Gulf region, the patient, layered, deliberately low-profile human intelligence network that made precision targeting possible, was being consumed by the operations it was designed to support. Every strike required activation. Every activation created exposure. Every exposure created loss. At some point, no one in any official capacity has stated when or whether that point has already been reached. The network would be too degraded to support the next operation, and the one after that would have to be built again, from the beginning, in a security environment that now understood exactly how the penetration had been achieved. Tangsiri's death was a data point in that calculation, so was the contractor's. And so were the burned contacts and the withdrawn officer and the compromised channel, and the 3 years of cultivation that would have to start over somewhere else with someone new who didn't know what they were being asked to do. The tanker captain is still waiting. He has been waiting for 31 days now. He has spoken to his shipping company 4 times. Each time the answer is the same: hold position. The strait has not reopened. The insurance market has not moved. The geopolitical signal that was supposed to follow the strike, the shift in Iranian calculation, the opening of a negotiating channel, the first indication that the blockade was entering a terminal phase, has not materialized. He watches the radar. He waits. The water around his vessel is very still. A man who spent 8 years building a weapon is dead. The weapon is still running. That is not a failure of the operation. It is the honest arithmetic of what targeted killing can and cannot resolve. It can remove a person. It cannot remove the conditions that made the person necessary. It cannot undo the doctrine they built, the system they designed, or the institutional logic that will produce the next version of the same threat inside the same organization within months. What the operation achieved is exactly what it was designed to achieve, and nothing more. What it didn't achieve is everything that was quietly assumed it would. If you follow how power actually moves, not through the statements issued after operations conclude, but through the decisions made before anyone knew how they would end, and the costs that never appear in the official account, then this channel exists for that purpose. Subscribe to Hidden Ops. The next file is already open.